Okay, so today we will talk about our reading that we should have done for today, um, Tuesday. We had one more speech and one more article to read, so we will discuss that. And those of you who were in class on Thursday for that know it's a lot better to do this when you are in class rather than just listening to me tell you about the reading, but this is the best we can do for the fun hybrid schedule we've got going on. So, before we get started, some announcements. Make sure that you have read my comments on your research topics and your questions in D2L. So I went through and I commented on all those. Last I looked, only maybe one or two people had read my comments. So make sure that you go through and read those, because pretty much everybody needs to do some kind of revision on that question. Do a little bit more thinking before you turn it in again. You will be turning in the revised question and your working thesis statement. So remember, that's going to be from the assignment sheet. Your thesis statement for this particular paper is going to be, my topic is worthy of further investigation because. So you're going to think about that question a little bit more, revise that, turn it in again by this Friday, and your working thesis statement. So you're going to pretty much just say why the question is worthy of further investigation. So again, just a couple of things that you need to turn in there. Make sure, I had several people that were turning in screenshots of things. Make sure that you're turning in an actual word processing document, either a PDF or a Word document or something like that. Don't send me a JPEG or things like that. Don't send me a meme, as that doesn't make the assignment. So, just type out the things you're supposed to type out and just do what's asked for. If you don't complete the weekly quiz, just FYI, you will be counted absent for one day of the week. I'm having some people that aren't, they're coming to class, but then they aren't doing the quiz, and that's half of your absences that are, weekly absences that are getting used up there. So make sure those add up pretty quick. Remember, you're not allowed to have more than 7 absences in the class, otherwise the department says no. Make sure that you're starting on your draft of your topic essay as well, because peer review is going to be next week. So you'll be turning in a peer review or like a rough draft, but it still should be a complete draft of your paper. The right length and everything, cover all the right material. You'll be turning that in next week, and we'll be completing peer review in class and on the discussion board. So make sure you've started working on it because you will have to do that starting next week. All right, again, why are we reading these? So again, these are all these pieces are looking at the same kind of general subject, but with different viewpoints and angles. So we're looking at kind of subtopics within a major topic. So make sure you're thinking about the point of view the author is writing from, and the arguments that they're trying to make, how they're different, how they're the same. How would you argue the same argument they are trying to make, or argue the other side of it? Think about those kind of things, because you're going to present in your final research paper, you're going to present your entire, both sides of the argument to be unbiased. So make sure that you're thinking about how the different arguments for your topic can be laid out. All right, so the first one that we read for today was the speech at the March on Washington by John Lewis. Now, I gave you, for those of you who aren't in class today, I'm going to show the video of him performing that speech, giving that speech, but I did include in the news section on D2L a link to the video I'm going to show, and I would suggest that you watch that. Because it's very powerful to see him in front of the crowds, speaking with emotion and all of that. It kind of gives you a different perspective on it when you actually hear somebody say it out loud. So this particular speech happened on August 28th, 1963. More than 200,000 demonstrators marched on Washington for jobs and freedom. The administration successfully pressured the John F. Kennedy administration to initiate a strong federal civil rights bill in Congress. Now, John F. Kennedy was killed in November of 63. It was actually my grandmother's 40th birthday was the day that John F. Kennedy was killed. So that was not a great birthday present. But this particular demonstration pressured the administration to start working on that civil rights bill, which the work continued after Kennedy was assassinated. It was during this event that Martin Luther King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. So this is the same day that that speech was given as well. Though 1963 was the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation, much of that promised in it had not happened. High levels of black unemployment, work that offered most African Americans only minimal wages and poor job mobility. In other words, they were kind of stuck with the position that they were given. Systematic disenfranchisement of many African Americans and the persistence of racial segregation in the South prompted discussions about a large-scale march for political and economic justice. So it's kind of like, you put the paperwork through and you say, these are the things that need to be done, but sometimes things don't move the way that they should. They don't move as quickly as they should. And he talks about this in his speech. After the march, King and other civil rights leaders met with President Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon Johnson at the White House, where they discussed the need for bipartisan support of civil rights legislation. Though they were passed after Kennedy's death, the provisions of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 reflect the demands of the march. So there was action after this. This caused change to happen, positive change to happen. So what is this speech about? Some of the main points. Though work has been done through the march, they should not be celebrating yet. People who are there shouldn't be celebrating yet because there is still work to do. There are still people of color who aren't being paid fair wages, are being incarcerated unfairly, and still aren't allowed to vote. The regulations with voting were set at a way instead of, it's kind of the way things are still done today sometimes, where it's like, oh, we're going to let you vote, but you have to meet this criteria. And then they make it hard for people to meet the criteria. So they're like, what are you complaining about? You have the right to vote. But they still make it hard for the people they don't want to vote to vote. Though the Civil Rights Bill is a good start, there are still protections that need to be added. People are not protected from the police for peaceful protest or unlawful arrest. There are still too many voting restrictions that disqualify African Americans who want to vote. The wage gap and fair employment practices are still not solved. Again, these things came out in the paperwork and things were moving through Congress, but they weren't actually coming to reality yet. And people were tired of waiting. There is still no political party that supports the plight of people of color, even if they claim to. If there was, there would not be a need to have marches and protests like these. And it's not just looking at things happening in the local government, but this is something that needs to be addressed in the federal government as well. People can no longer be patient and wait. That's what all these people that were fighting for this change, they have been told, no, it's going to happen. Just sit down, just hang on. We're working on it. Just be patient. And after a while, it was like, all right, we're done with the patient and wait part. We need things to happen. People are suffering. Things need to happen now. Must continue speaking up until positive change happens. And if that does not happen, the demonstrations will spread, all with the spirit of love and dignity. So it's not... there's a difference in different types of protests and demonstrations where some seem like a threat versus some are there to bring awareness. And so he talks about how it's, these demonstrations are going to keep happening, but they all are with the spirit of love and dignity. They want to spread love and for people of color to have the dignity that they deserve. And that's the whole point of these demonstrations. It's not to be violent. It's not to seem like a threat. It's saying like, look, we've been promised these things and this is what we want. We're just asking for what we've been promised. And there must be true democracy for all people. So what argument is the writer trying to make? Those strides have been made to help people of color in America. It isn't enough, and people are still being hurt. So people are they're suffering during this. Be patient and wait. And while everyone's trying to be patient and wait, bad things are still happening. And so that's why these changes need to be made. African Americans deserve the same rights and wages as white people. People shouldn't be hurt, arrested, or killed for participating in peaceful protests. I know he mentions in there in the speech that there are people that have been sentenced to death for peaceful protest. How insane is that? Be patient and wait is not a strategy that anyone will do any longer. They're not, like it's not time to wait. We've been waiting long enough. We're not going to be doing that anymore. People of color will continue and expand protests and marches until something is done. And all the protests must be done not with violence, but with a spirit of love and dignity. So it's, again, bringing awareness to what's happening in a way that people will listen. That's the important part. So what tools does a writer use to convince us of his point? So there's definite appeals to emotion, making you feel for the people who are still suffering in the different conditions where they are. Repetition is a big thing in this particular speech. He repeats a lot of the same words over and over again. He's talking about, he says now. I keep, when I was watching the video, it's like, he emphasizes the word now, over and over again. And that's one way that you can bring emphasis to a very particular point, a very important point in your paper, is to repeat it often. And that's what you're going to be doing, especially with your thesis statement, because remember, that's your argument for the whole paper. And so you're going to continually remind your reader, like, hey, this is what I'm arguing. Don't forget, these are my different subpoints and subtopics, but they're all pointing back to that main argument. Let me tell you what it is again. So make sure that you're, using that repetition, because, if you hear something on repeat a lot, then it really sticks in your brain. Using those specific examples from sharecroppers to people in different cities, talking about all these different, he's naming names here, saying these people are being hurt. These are the people that aren't doing what they should be to help, that kind of thing. And of course, there is that call to action where it's saying like the change needs to happen. It needs to happen now. And we are not going to stop until it happens. So how is this topic timely today? I mean, this is 1963. So how is this still apply today? So there continues to be a racial wage gap. So that's something that is still an issue. People of color are still unfairly targeted by law enforcement and receive harsher punishments and longer sentences for the same crimes that white people commit. So they're targeted, they're picked out. If there's a group of people, then it seems like law enforcement is going to focus on people of color as the dangerous criminals, as opposed to really looking at what was happening and looking at the crime as a whole and who all was involved. They are also attacked physically and through regulations by people who do not want them to vote. So again, we talked about that. I think it said something about back then you had to have a 6th grade education to vote. And people of color didn't have as much access to education as other people did. So it made it harder for them to meet those regulations. So they were saying, hey, you can vote, but then they don't give people of color access to what they need to qualify, because they set those qualifications outside of the realm of reality. People of color being singled out in jail for peaceful protests, while many of those who stormed the Capitol, though arrested, have been released. You think about, I remember, I can't remember for what event it was, when there was I think it was some vote that was going to happen, where people had boarded up their stores, and they had all the police everywhere, and they had curfew set. And this was when there weren't demonstrations even going on. It was like there was such a level of fear for people. It was going to be around, like Black Lives Matter demonstration or something, where they thought there were going to be protests like that there was such a level of fear. You saw the pictures of all the police on the Capitol steps for Black Lives Matter protests versus when the mob went into the Capitol. There was no one stopping them. They were pretty much just kind of let in the door. So it just shows you the difference of how different races are targeted differently by law enforcement. And then afterwards, how different their punishment is. One lady was like released to her mom, if these were Black people who had done this, would that be the same? I don't think so. And so there's that change that needs to happen. There always seems to be the promise of change, but it is very slow coming. And that's something we still see today, where there tends to be a lot of promise of things that are going to happen, and then it's still we still feel like we've got to sit around and wait. So the other article was a New York Times article from the Modern Love section. So all of these are just different writers who write about issues with different types of love, whether it be familial or dating or anything like that. So this was written by Kim McLaren. This was actually from 2006, but it's called Race Wasn't an Issue to Him, Which Was an Issue to Me. So we think about, what is this article about? So this is a Black female writer who began dating a white man after her divorce from a white man and began facing some of the same issues as she did when she was in her marriage. So her ex chose not to learn anything about or pay attention to race and thought the fact that she did meant that she was always looking for race. And I feel like that's a viewpoint that a lot of white people have, where they go, you're just looking for people to be racist. You're just looking for racist things to happen, when it's their privilege to not understand that these are racist things that are happening every day, that it's not, you don't have to go out and look for it. It comes and finds you. He did not notice the race issues she dealt with, and he was also uncomfortable talking about it. He didn't want to learn. It just made him uncomfortable to even address the issue. She chose not to address race with her date until she decided if she liked him. And it seemed to be going well, but there really wasn't a spark there. So she decided that, it was, like they could be friends, but didn't really see it going anywhere. There was not any, she didn't mention anything about race to him at that point. And after that, she went out with some other people. And she, she was honest with him, but she went out with, some other people of various races. And then he contacted her again, and they decided to go out again. And they started kind of a relationship, fairly early on, just a couple of dates. However, after having a heated discussion with some white students about racial genetics and inferiority, she was talking to her date about it. And he was like, I don't understand the problem. And so these are the same kind of conversations that she had been having with her husband that had caused all these issues. So the date said he didn't think it was a bad thing that people had different opinions about race. And she was beyond having different opinions, but not being willing to understand or attempt to understand other people's viewpoints. But it seemed like in his case that he didn't see a point in really trying to learn. Not every interracial couple addresses race, and some say it's never an issue, but the writer could never live like that. So she says she hears from her friends who are in interracial couples that they don't, it's never a problem for them. And she's like, well, maybe it's not, but she doesn't see how that could actually be. The writer feels that members of a couple, especially an interracial couple, must both be willing to address race if they are to be successful. So it's kind of like one of those things, and when I talk about why it's timely today, when you talk about colorblind racism, where somebody says, oh, I don't even see color, I don't even take it into account. That's an issue. Because there are differences between the races, and you have to, or among the races, and you have to address that. You have to be knowledgeable of that, and you have to be willing to understand those things and to discuss it. The writers told the man that she couldn't see him anymore because he was white, which made him mad, of course, which proved her point. He said that it was ridiculous, and she's like, that's exactly the problem, because it's not ridiculous. I don't see it as ridiculous. Even though he seemed like he could the word she used was grapple with race, she couldn't be with him because her history with race is so much deeper. So even him beginning to actually wanting to learn and to ask these questions is good, but she has been facing these issues for so much longer that their viewpoints it was going to take way too long for an understanding to happen. And so she's just like, I just can't, it's just too much for me to do this right now. He seemed surprised that race would even be an issue, which he, was thinking that's very innocent of him. But it also, again, shows that privilege, that if you haven't had to address race before, then you don't understand that there could be issues there. She states that she just can't be with a white man because it costs her too much. And in the end, he still doesn't see it from her point of view. At the end, he still says, and now it's costing me. And that just shows that it's kind of one of those sort of playing the victim things there with him. and he only still sees it from his point of view, that it's what it's costing him. He's not trying to understand it from her point of view and the reason why she feels the way that she does. So what argument is the writer trying to make? There can be issues in relationships if both partners don't have the same views on race or if they aren't willing to discuss it. That's the issue is, you can have different views on different things, but if you don't address those different views, then that's the problem. If you aren't even willing to discuss what the issues are, then you're not going to be able to advance in a relationship. There's a level of privilege when someone doesn't think there's a difference between people of different races. Not even seeing the differences or willing to address the differences, that's a level of privilege that you haven't had to address those things before. Change can't happen until people get out of their comfort zones. That's what the whole point of demonstrations, speeches, different things like that, when you're calling people out on the issues, it makes people uncomfortable, and people don't like to be uncomfortable. But if you're staying in a comfort zone, then change doesn't happen. So you have to make people uncomfortable for things to change. Couples with members of different races need to address race because they cannot be successful if they don't try to understand each other. Sometimes a relationship won't work out because their histories with race are so different. So even when people try to understand the other person, it still doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship is going to work out, depending on just the past history of the people in the relationship. Some people will still not try to see race from another person's point of view. Even when it's pointed out to them, some people still don't try to see it from another person's point of view. Do people actually think that race will not be an issue in relationships? Is that something that people just think, oh, it's not going to happen. It's fine. And that's the viewpoint of some people, and some people realize that, it can be an issue. So what tools do the writer use to convince us of her point? Really putting us into the scene, so there's dialogue in this. It's something called literary journalism, where you're taking elements of fiction, so it's almost like you're creating a scene, you're giving us dialogue, you're talking about how somebody's acting, how they're moving, that kind of thing, and you put the person, so as you're reading it, it's almost like you're reading, a story, but it's real, it's actually happening. So putting you in the scene to kind of get you involved in the story. She's using that personal story. She's telling her own experience so that people either can or can't relate. But just presenting that is very important. Presenting the other side of the argument, but arguing against it. So she's presenting his point of view, the things that he said, but she's also going, but this is why it's a problem. And that's what you are going to be doing in your papers. You're going to be like, okay, people have this point of view. It's not the same as mine, but this is why my point of view is better. And also those appeals to emotion. Talking to people who have had similar or different experiences, kind of putting the person, the reader, into the perspective of the people in these relationships and making you feel those same emotions. So how is this topic timely today? While interracial relationships have been looked down upon in the past, they are more prominent and accepted today. So you think about, interracial marriage wasn't even legal at certain points. But now it's something that's definitely more accepted, and it's happening more and more as the perception of it changes. You watch commercials, and I swear I think every family in every commercial is a mixed race couple. So it's something that they see that representation now that it's happening. There's the issue of colorblind racism. The people that say, I don't see color, it's not a problem. Well, it's not a problem for you. And that is a privilege to you, but that can be just as damaging as outright racism. People who aren't affected by race privilege a lot of times don't want to address race at all, which causes tension in many areas of life, whether that be in relationships, whether that be in jobs, all these different areas of life. When people aren't willing to address issues that are happening based on their own privilege because it's not something they've had to deal with before, then that can cause a lot of tension. There are important issues about access to care, jobs, and basic needs related to race that still need to be reconciled. Okay, so those are the pieces that we were reading for today. Your assignments Review the comments on your proposed research topic and question. Make sure you turn in the revised question, your working thesis by Friday. Not on Friday, by Friday. Watch the video or come to class on Thursday, depending on which one you're supposed to be doing, and complete the weekly quiz before Sunday. I do have an extra credit assignment in the Dropbox based around the Super Bowl. So it's all you're doing is you are saying who you think is going to win and what you think the score is going to be. And then the 5 closest people get 3 points on their topic essay grade. So just something kind of fun to do, and you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it's up to you. Make sure you start working on that topic essay because the peer review draft is due next week, and then the final draft is going to be due a week from Sunday. So make sure that you are not waiting till the last minute to start working on that. And make sure that if you have any questions, you let me know either in class, or you can email me, or just whatever works best for you. So if you have any questions, just let me know.